Chapter 1 of Vera, Her Mind to Wake, Book 1 by Julie Prentice. Vera heard them walk into the bathroom, giggling together and noisily setting up shop in front of the only decent mirrors in the whole high school. Only 2 girls entered, from the sound of it, and they were unaware that she had lifted her long legs when the door opened, afraid that they would ask her questions she did not want to answer. Earlier, just before her new history teacher had started his lesson, she had walked into class and overheard a disturbingly pink-clad girl whisper to her pink-cloned friend that she looked sadder today than a homeless puppy. Vera had grabbed one of the bathroom passes and disappeared into the nearest stall before she did something unadvised, like shout at the girl, "Shut your ugly mouth." Vera's emotions were just so out of control these days, and the smallest things made her so angry she could almost see red. Or pink. The 2 girls' pink outfits were still burned into her retinas. She was starting to feel guilty for her emotional overreaction by the time this new pair barged into her sanctuary, making enough noise to cover the sound of her hastily lifted feet. She was too cowardly to face them, though. She didn't want to have to stumble through the inevitable questions about her parents. This was such a small town, and news traveled faster than an ice cream cone could melt. Everyone knew her recent history, and some people reacted by being overly caring, and others avoided her completely. Of the 2, she preferred avoidance. The wounds were still too fresh for her to talk about her parents to perfect strangers. She didn't want to talk to the girls, and she wasn't even sure they would want to talk to her. But even the slightest possibility of speaking to them made her anxious. She felt relieved to have them in the room, though, because they helped to distract her from her painful thoughts. Tears were starting to lurk at the corners of her eyes, and she did not want to cry during school again. Images came, unbidden, to the forefront of her thoughts. A red bouquet of roses, 2 coffins, one white, one black, hands clasped in prayer, marble statues on a green lawn, old and new flowers on cared-for headstones, green indoor-outdoor carpeting, a gaping hole for 2. She kept her now familiar tears at bay with effort, pushing aside those same images, ones that came to her at all hours of her days and nights since that day, Wednesday, June 6th. She couldn't hide from them anywhere, but she managed to push them away from her for the present, though not as easily as she could push her light brown hair off of her face. Her green eyes, erstwhile so full of life, were shrouded and suffused with fatigue. She had stayed up late reading the night before, exhausting herself so she could fall asleep. She focused her red-rimmed green eyes on the girls' ankles, and she tried to take in the details of their feet, crossing the indigo and cream tile floor, their clicks and clacks scuffing the recently wet, lemon-scented mosaic, so she wouldn't start to dwell again on her new reality. A recent orphan, forced to relocate to her aunt's small Vermont city, or, more accurately, town. Orphan. Orphaned. Vera had never before hated words, but the car accident 3 months before had changed everything. Before that unspeakable June 6th happened, during times of stress, Vera could start singing Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat songs in her head, particularly Joseph's coat, to feel better. But since that 6-6 day, she had been unable to disassociate her favorite song from discordant, painful memories. The song used to remind her of rainbows with its litany of colors, but now the colors reminded her of the crimson roses and the white and black coffins and the azure sky and the violet circles under Aunt Frances's gray eyes. The girls at the mirrors continued the conversation they had started upon entering the bathroom, and Vera let the sounds and reverberations drench her senses. She consciously ignored the memories flashing behind her eyes and the thoughts of her parents that were bubbling to the surface. If she didn't, she knew from experience that hot, salty tears would start to fall, and it took no time at all for her tears to transition from a light shower to an all-consuming downpour. Her eyes could use a well-deserved rest from such briny emotional abuse. She took in a noiseless, slow breath and held it, attempting to compose herself. She counted to 5 in her head, let the waste trickle out over 10 seconds, then took in another fresh, slow, glorious inhalation. At least she told herself it was a glorious inhalation, even though her nostrils were bombarded with odors she did not even want to identify, barely masked by lemon cleaner. While exhaling the just-used air, she wondered if her absence from class, the 3rd time that day, her 4th day at Montpelier High School, had already become conspicuous. Seniors are usually given some slack, and her recent history gave her even more with her teachers. But she knew that she was starting to drift over the line of acceptable melancholia. As Aunt Frances stoically reminded her this morning over soggy Special K and whole milk, it had now been 3 months since their passing. 3 whole months since the ground beneath her feet had evaporated, disappeared, no trail of breadcrumbs leading away from the disaster zone. Vera shifted her weight ever so slightly on the seat and sighed mentally. An ache that had entered her chest the day of the accident throbbed as she tried not to shout out, "I just lost my parents. Give me a break." Words she had wanted to say to Aunt Frances this morning. She had just lost her parents, her home, and especially Ella. God, how Vera wished Ella could be with her today. Ella would tell her that shouting in an echo chamber is a good way to clean out her sinuses. Vera had to crack a smile at the thought of her eccentric friend, progeny of an even more eccentric pair. "I'm definitely thinking of getting it pierced," said one of the girls, and Vera was abruptly pulled out of her thoughts. She recognized the speaker as one of the queen bees of her new senior class, Nova Carter. Vera was doubly glad that she had lifted her legs. Nova was a real piece of work. On Vera's first day at MHS, Thursday, August 30th, she had run afoul of the pert, popular Nova. Vera had been turned around, looking for her art classroom during 6th period, and had stumbled upon cigarette smoke just outside a newly opened bathroom door. Vera had coughed loudly, being allergic to the acrid smoke. But Nova, who had been smoking illegally in the bathroom, one window cracked, took it into her head that Vera had been deliberately making a scene. Vera's eyes had watered as she'd continued coughing, and a nearby teacher had stopped to check on her, thereby discovering Nova's secret dirty pleasure. Nova no longer had the cigarette out, and when the teacher asked to look through her bag, Nova had somehow hidden the evidence. Maybe she had finished her last one and had thrown it out just in time. Vera wondered about Nova's lighter, though. What had happened to the lighter? Was it a book of matches? That's unlikely. Nova hadn't gotten into trouble because there was no evidence except a foul odor and suspicion. But she had glared at Vera menacingly behind the teacher's back, the foul look on her face at odds with her perfectly coiffed hair and baby blue sheath dress ensemble. Vera could tell right then that the incident would be remembered and some sort of retaliation planned. Vera imagined that if Nova knew about her presence in the bathroom, something unpleasant could and would happen. At the very least, Nova would ask about Vera's parents, expressly to see her cry. Girls like Nova Carter embody the label frenemy. Any friends they do have are usually just minions. Which meant that the girl responding to Nova with the appropriate amount of awe had to be Jillian Miles. Batmans will find their Robins. Not that Nova had ever rescued anybody in her life, but she undoubtedly cast herself as a hero in her own mind. Oh my God, really? But won't that hurt like a lot? Jillian sounded a bit scandalized, and Vera cast her mind back to the first comment she had overheard, something about a piercing. Her curiosity aroused, she stayed in the present and kept her attention upon the two girls. What piercing? I'm sure it will. I mean, getting my belly button pierced hurt a lot, but that didn't even compare to the pain of getting my nipples pierced. Nova paused, and Vera immediately covered her own chest, crushing her backpack in the process, truly horrified at the thought of piercing such sensitive body parts. And what on earth could Nova be thinking of piercing next? Nova laughed a little and continued wryly, and even if it hurts, who cares? At least it's definitely a piercing I can keep hidden from my parents. Jillian let out a nervous giggle, and Nova chuckled some more, thoroughly amused by herself. Vera thought hard. Nova said that her belly button was pierced, and her nipples. What on earth is left to pierce that's hidden? I mean, just think about it. Any guy who sees it will be immediately impressed. Nova seemed to be trying to convince herself of this fact, just as much as her audience, although she didn't have any idea that Vera was listening too. Vera furrowed her brow and racked her brain for any wisp of an idea, but she didn't have enough information to name the topic at hand with any degree of veracity. Where are you going to get it done? You're going to ask for a woman, aren't you? I mean, you wouldn't let a man see you naked, would you? Jillian asked. Naked? What? Vera moved her head around, trying to see out the small cracks between the stall door and the next stall, training her eyes on the two girls preening themselves. She could just make them out by keeping her eyes on the mirrors they were standing in front of. Her eyes started to water, so she closed her right eye and squinted with her left, peering out through the extremely small aperture. She moved her eye rapidly back and forth to see them both. They were both rooting through their bags and depositing their finds on the lips of the white ceramic sinks. The unnatural-looking fluorescent lighting unflatteringly confirmed Vera's suspicions that Nova had dyed blonde hair. Vera could see the dark roots at the top, looking even darker than they would if the rest of Nova's hair were not so bleached. Nova produced a hair tie from her bag and pulled her hair off her face into a loose ponytail, the strands almost crackling like dry kindling as she manipulated them. Jillian had natural auburn hair, straight as a whip, all the way down her back, and bright, bright green eyes. She had black eyeliner on both the tops and bottoms of her lids, but Vera couldn't detect much other makeup, aside from her purple-colored lips. Nova and Jillian were occupying the two sinks in the middle of the utilitarian vanity, and their proximity highlighted their similarities. They were both wearing practically identical outfits: tight V-neck cotton t-shirts, pink on Nova, green on Jillian, very short skirts, white knee-highs, and black patent leather short heels. Vera shivered. How can they be wearing such short skirts on a blustery day like today? Vera had thought that the sheath dress Nova had been wearing the other day had been at odds with the weather, but at least that dress's hemline had been below the knee. Vera was not used to the weather in Vermont. She had asked her aunt for the temperature over her bowl of cereal and had dressed as warmly as she could. 48 degrees at 7 a.m. constituted cold in Vera's mind. She looked at Nova and Jillian and couldn't help but draw a parallel between them and the two girls she had fled from in the classroom. They were the second pair of girls that Vera noticed dressed as twins. Perhaps it was an epidemic at MHS. Nova pulled out a lip gloss from her bag and scoffed. I don't care who does it. I mean, the whole point of getting it done is for men to see it and be awed by it, you know? And as soon as I can get Dalton to ask me out, the sooner I can start plotting how and when I'm going to reveal my various piercings. Nova fluffed her bangs and applied more cherry lip gloss to her already shiny red lips, her mascara and eyeshadow covered hazel eyes intent upon the glass. Plus, I've heard that it feels phenomenal when a guy licks it during oral sex. I'm definitely going to get it pierced. Vera couldn't believe her ears. Did Nova just say that out loud in the girls' bathroom? She shuddered and carefully shifted her weight a bit on the seat, being as quiet as she could. If she didn't want to be discovered before, she certainly couldn't be discovered now, not after hearing what she had just heard. Vera clenched her legs tightly together on the seat, truly horrified at the thought of piercing anything down there, let alone the delicate organ Nova was referring to. Vera had never even known that that could be pierced in the first place. And why? Why would anyone want to get it done? To impress a guy? Vera wasn't sure how Nova could not know that getting that pierced, coupled with her nipple piercings, would label her as up for anything. Any guy seeing it would instantly know that Nova is not the girl next door. Though perhaps that was the point, Vera conceded. She was immediately intimidated by the relatively normal-looking girl in front of the mirror. Vera would never have guessed that Nova's sexuality was so dominant. True, Nova was dressed in a very short skirt with dyed blonde hair and copious makeup, but nothing about her appearance suggested that she was so kinky. Vera chastised herself for being so naive. It's not like people go around wearing signs on their chests that declare their personal proclivities. Though it would appear that underneath her scant clothing, Nova was wearing piercings that said exactly that, and perhaps more. Jillian cleared her throat. Isn't Dalton dating that junior Holly something? She turned towards Nova, delaying her own ministrations in front of the mirror. I don't know if you could call that dating. Have you ever even talked to that girl? I seriously doubt if she has more than 2 brain cells to rub together. Ouch. What a thing to say about someone. Vera watched as Nova squirted some cream onto her hands from a bottle she had just taken out of her purse. Vera focused on the off-white serum and saw light glinting off of it, as if there were sparkles in it. Nova started to rub it on her face, and Vera realized that there were sparkles in it. Vera didn't like the effect, though. It made Nova's face a little too shiny. Dalton won't be with her for long, trust me. Nova continued patting the cream into place on her face and neck, smiling at her reflection. Her grin reminded Vera of the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. Jillian turned back to her own reflection to reapply some of her plum lip gloss, and then shrugged her shoulders. If you say so. Yeah, I'm going to blow Holly out of the water. Dalton's going to be mine. Nova smacked her lips together loudly and smiled maniacally. Vera was suddenly very glad that she was not Holly, which greatly surprised her. She had been wishing to be anyone else for the past 3 months. But Nova scared her. Who knew what that former comment had meant? Vera couldn't quite place Nova's tone. Was it a tad bit savage? It meant more than its cliché suggested, Vera sensed. Forget Batman. Nova should be cast as Two-Face. Vera shuddered again. A piercing on her clitoris? What is Nova thinking? That has to be one of the most painful piercings ever. And now Nova is plotting to steal a boy out from under his girlfriend? Who is this girl? She double-checked that nothing was showing under the stall door, her heart beating more rapidly than normal. A bead of sweat appeared on her brow, and she wiped it off with the back of her hand. Her legs were starting to get a little numb, pins and needles intruding upon her consciousness. She definitely couldn't leave now, not with them still standing there. She remembered suddenly that they were also in 4th period history. They had to know that it was ending soon. She really, really hoped that they would get a move on. Please, let's go, girls. I can't hold my legs up much longer, she cried out internally. Nova capped her cream and dropped it back into her purse-like bag, making a clinking noise as it bumped into something inside. This seemed to be an unspoken signal, because Jillian gathered her own things and placed her messenger bag on her left shoulder. Thank goodness! Vera flexed her toes inside her favorite sky blue sneakers and waited expectantly. She was dressed monochromatically today, matching her favorite shoes. Blue jeans, a light blue cotton turtleneck, and a puffy dark blue down vest. It was so much colder outside than she was used to. Vera felt goosebumps forming just thinking about the uncovered legs in front of her. Nova took one last look at herself in the mirror before grabbing her own fancy bag and slinging the strap over her head and across her body. She picked up her books and the two left the bathroom just as Jillian asked, "What are you going to do to get Dalton?" Ha! The question is, what am I not going to do? Nova laughed again, and Jillian reluctantly chimed in. Their laughter trapped inside the room as the door swung shut behind them, echoing around the walls. Vera couldn't help but feel a slight sense of foreboding, even as relief spread through her as her legs finally reacquainted themselves with the tile floor. She quickly got out of the stall, stomping her feet a little to return her circulation to normal. At the door, she checked to make sure the girls were gone from sight before she hurried after them back to class, her faded forest green backpack bumping into her with every step. That's the end of chapter 1.